The Mistralorn Saga, Chapter 1, Stone and Silence. It's a strange thing how quiet stone can be. You'd think a dwarf would be comforted by it, wrapped in the cool hush of old rock, the way a babe is wrapped in wool. But this was not the stone of the mountain home. This was prison stone, scraped into uniformity, stripped of memory, too young and too dead to speak. I sat with my back to it anyway. If you're going to rot, best to do it with your spine straight and your thoughts your own. The cell was 7 paces wide, 6 deep. I'd measured. 3 days in a box will do that to a man. It had a cot that sagged like the belly of a brewer after a midwinter feast, a rust-flecked bucket, and iron bars that didn't so much hum with magic as sulk in its absence. I tried a few words on them, just whispers, nothing flashy, but they didn't so much as twitch. Though I called, I knew the magic wouldn't answer. Without my spellbook, I was silenced. Oh, sure, I could still see the weave. The weave never leaves you. Magic is in the air, in the bones of the world, threaded through every stone and breath. I saw it in the mortar between bricks, in the tiny glint behind the guard's eyes, but seeing the weave and weaving it are two very different things. The spellbook is my tongue, my voice, my hands, and my heart. Without it, my calls were but silent screams into a deaf sky. To those who have never known magic, I doubt you understand. How can I explain? It's like losing a sense. If you were born blind, darkness is the only world you know. But imagine living your life in vivid colors, sunlight on gold, Twain dancing over ale, the shimmers of runes mid-cast, then awakening one day to blackness, complete and cruel. It is worse knowing what you've lost. I felt less. Not just powerless, but diminished, as if the best part of me had been sealed in a vault I could no longer open. Still, I was where I was, and it is what it is. As Great-Grandpa Bertram used to say, every setback is just a plot twist in the grand tavern tale of life. As I sat, mired in my thoughts, I heard footsteps coming, sharp and certain. Not the lazy shuffle of the drunkard guard, nor the iron drag of the one who fancied himself a torturer. No, this one walked like a man who knew where he was going and didn't care who knew it. Keys rattled, the lock turned, and with a sigh that was almost a groan, "Up, dwarf." I opened my eyes. He was taller than me, of course. They all were. But this one wore his height like armor, like he thought it made him right. "Where are we going, then?" I asked, stretching slow, letting the stiffness crack from my joints. "If it's execution, I'd like a pint first. 2 if there's a hanging. My throat dries under pressure." The guard grunted, unimpressed. "New orders. You're being moved." "Ah, a promotion, is it? To the new suite with a view?" He didn't laugh. They never do. Still, I stood and followed. I found it's best to go quiet. Better to let them think you're cowed. Let the pot simmer before you boil it over. The guard didn't bother with shackles. Maybe he thought I was harmless. Maybe he was just lazy. Either way, I thanked him silently and followed, boots clacking on stone like the ticking of a slow clock. We walked down a corridor that bent in the way things do when they've been built by Knitti and repaired by fools. At the end, he opened a thick door, shoved it with his shoulder, and gestured. "In." I stepped through. The door slammed shut behind me with the finality of a coffin lid. The cell was bigger, yes, but that's like saying a grave is roomier than a box. Still stone, still iron, still despair sweating from the walls like mildew. But now, I had company. One of them was a dwarf like myself, though broader in the shoulder and thicker through the brow. His hair was a mess of red and gray, braided in places and matted in others. He was slumped against the wall, boots kicked off, snoring softly with one hand still curled around an empty tankard, like it was the only warm thing in the world. The other sat in a corner like a shadow, pretending to be a man, He wore his cloak like a habit, hunched low with his head down. Lips moved, but the words were whispers, lost to the air, like prayers said too late. I cleared my throat, loud enough to be polite, but not so loud as to invite trouble. "Well now," I said, rubbing my hands together, "this is cozier than expected. Just needs a fire, a pint, and a bit of stew, and we'd have ourselves a fine little inn. Heck, I'd even settle for just the stew." The drunk? No, not drunk. Not anymore. I knew the slouch of a man who'd been pickled, and the twitch of one who was drying out. This one was the latter. He cracked one eye. It was bloodshot, but clear underneath, and it sized me up like a butcher eyeing a goat. "Who in the 9 hells are you?" he growled, voice gravelly and hoarse. "Thorgrim Ironvein, brewer of fine ales, slinger of spells, and current tenant of this charming establishment." I gave him a half bow, half curtsy. "And you, good sir?" He snorted. "Thorak, I think." "You think?" He blinked like the light hurt. Last thing I remember, I was arm wrestling a half-ogre in a tavern in Windcross. Woke up here. Don't know how, don't know why. Might have won, though. "Well, that will explain the bruises," I said cheerfully, nodding to his knuckles, which looked like they'd gone a few rounds with a stone wall. He followed my gaze, flexed his hands, and chuckled. "Could have been worse. Could have woken up married." "Give it time," I said, settling down with my back to the wall. "Plenty of lonely folks in prison." From the corner, the muttering continued. Neither of us looked. Not yet. I knew magic was outlawed here. They didn't even pretend about it. No hearings, no trials, just a pair of cold iron cuffs and a cell with your name on it. I'd already tested the bars in my last room, whispered a few harmless syllables under my breath, just to feel the edges of the weave. Nothing stirred. No tingle, no pull, like trying to breathe underwater. I should have kept quiet about it. I knew that. But seeing another dwarf, battered, bleary, and beard thick as my Uncle Gorm's mead, well, it got the better of me. Trust comes too easily when the face feels familiar. That's the trouble with us Ironveins. We never did learn how to shut up before the trouble starts. Thorik and I had fiddled into a rhythm. Not quite friendly, not yet bored. The kind of comfortable silence that only dwarves and stones can properly share. Then came the shouting. Muffled at first, echoing down the corridor like thunder through a canyon. And then closer, sharper. Someone was putting up a hell of a fight. Boots scrambled, keys fumbled, and then, "Let go of me, you oversized turnip!" A guard cursed, something slammed against metal, and the door burst open. In flew a blur of motion and cursing, bundled into a coat 2 sizes too big and eyes 10 times too alive. The gnome landed in a heap, sprang up like a cat tossed from a cart, and whirled on the closing door. "I'll turn your teeth into gravel, you son of a mule!" The door slammed shut before the threat could be fulfilled. And for a moment, the cell was still. I blinked. There she was. Wild hair like autumn leaves caught in a storm, a face smudged with dirt or soot, or both, and eyes sharp enough to slice bread. She stood all of 3.5 feet tall, but radiated the kind of energy that could crack a glassware. And I knew her. Not from town, not from a tavern, not even from a hazy night on Festival Mead. I knew her from a dream. The night before, clear as crystal, we stood at the mouth of a cave atop a hill, the sea wind at our backs and a village nestled below. Her hands shimmered with a dull, earthen light, like sunlight through dust, and the ground trembled faintly beneath her feet. I stood beside her, holding a staff I've never owned, speaking words I don't remember learning. Now, she was real, here, in my cell. I'm no stranger to omens. When you dabble in the arcane, dreams start meaning more than just cheese before bread. But this rattled something deeper. Still, I'm Thorgrim Ironvein, and when God hands you mystery, you smile and offer to drink. "Well then," I said, offering a short, polite bow. "Seems we've got another cellmate, and one I've seen before in my dreams." Thorak grunted. The gnome narrowed her eyes, more suspicious than amused. "I'm Thorgrim, brewer, scholar, an occasional jailbird. And you are? The gnome didn't answer right away. She brushed dirt from her sleeves with quick, irritated motions, muttering about thick-headed guards and bruised dignity. Then she looked at me. Not fondly, but not unkindly either. Like a farmer eyeing weather on the horizon. Curious, but cautious. Tara, she said at last. Voice sharp. Young, but sure. And I'm not interested. Story of my life, I said with a shrug. But not what I meant. I have visions from time to time, and I've seen you recently. Thorax snorted indelicately. Tara rolled her eyes, then crossed the cell to the far wall, ran a hand along the stone, then crouched beside it. Her fingers brushed the floor like she was listening to something deeper than silence. The stone answered. Not in words, but in stillness. A quiet tension hung in the air, like the ground itself was holding its breath. Ah, so that was it. I'd read about them in dusty tomes and marginal notes. Kineticists. Magic that didn't follow the usual rules. No incantations, no components, just natural essence channeled to the world itself. It was different from what I do. My magic is studied, deliberate, a discipline of mind over matter. It's about imposing your will upon the world, reshaping reality through focus and formula. Every spell a structured argument, every gesture a precise stroke and an arcane equation. Kineticists, though, theirs was another path. Theirs was a natural bond, an understanding, almost an agreement between them and the elements they called upon. Where I must learn, they simply are. For them, magic wasn't summoned, it was second nature, as easy as breathing. It fascinated me. And if I'm honest, it made me a little envious. Not that I'd admit that out loud. I made a mental note not to get on her bad side. Then I made another note not to let her see the first note. Well, I said, leaning against the opposite wall, if you're going to tunnel us out, I call dibs on the front seat of the escape cart. She glanced up at me, a flicker of something strange in her eyes. Recognition? Amusement? Or maybe that faint echo of the dream wasn't just on my side. I don't tunnel, she said coolly. Stone listens, but it doesn't always obey. Besides, I'm not done yelling at the guards yet. Thorak raised an eyebrow. She's got spirit. She's got stone, I added. Tara looked at us both, then sighed and plopped down cross-legged. And I've got a headache. We hadn't quite finished the silence that followed Tara's dramatic arrival when the door creaked open again, this time with none of the shouting or shoving. Instead, a guard stepped aside, and in walked a man with the kind of calm that either came from deep wisdom or dangerous delusion. Tall, lean, with features that didn't match any of the local stock. Dark hair pulled into a simple knot, loose robes that had clearly seen travel, and a necklace of polished shells that clinked softly with each step. His eyes scanned the cell and stopped on us, with quiet curiosity, not fear. Well, we're quite the collection today, I said, giving him a half-bow. Thorgrim Ironvein, brewer of dubious ales, wizard of slightly less dubious spells, and you are? The man inclined his head. Ryu, he said simply, of the Southern Isles. That's come a long way. I was on a pilgrimage. A pilgrimage that ends in a jail cell? Tara asked, arms crossed. He gave a small, rueful smile. Apparently, I broke a law I didn't know existed. A woman was injured in the square. I used what gifts I have to help her. They did not appreciate that. Magic? I asked, a little more sharply than I meant to. He nodded. Healing waters and a wind to steady her heart. I didn't know your laws forbade kindness. The last line hit something deep. Even Thorak gave a grunt that sounded more like sympathy than skepticism. I felt it then, a whisper of energy around him. Not arcane, not divine. It moved differently, like Tara's stone, but fluid, breathing, a current running beneath the surface. Another kineticist. Well, I said, gesturing grandly to the stone bench. You're in good company, friend. We've got rock, we've got wind, and we've got need if we can find a way to brew it from the prison drool. Ryu sat gently, folding himself with the grace of a monk. Then perhaps the gods have placed me where I need to be. We passed the next few minutes in that strange sort of peace you only find in places like this, where time forgets to count, and silence becomes its own sort of conversation. Thorak rubbing his temples and mumbling about needing a pint, Kara idly tracing patterns in the dirt with a finger, her gaze flicking between the walls and Ryu. Ryu himself sat like a prayer in human form, still, breathing evenly, as though he were meditating instead of waiting for a trial that might never come. As for me, I leaned back and watched, not with suspicion, just curiosity. We were a strange collection of stones flung into the same stream. It was only natural to wonder how we'd shape the current, or be shaped by it. So, I said, stretching my arms behind me, a brewer, a warrior, a stonebender, and a foreign priest walk into a jail cell. Sounds like the start of a terrible joke, doesn't it? Depends on how it ends, Tara muttered. Hopefully with a drink, Thorak grunted. A drink and a bath, added Ryu with a faint smile. In that order. We shared a laugh, thin, worn, but real. And that's when we heard it. Soft at first, like wind in a broken pipe. Then louder. I'm going to break out. I'm going to break out. I'm going to break out. The voice came from the darkest corner of the cell, where a man had been huddled since before I arrived. Hooded, motionless. I had forgotten him entirely. We all had. Until now. I'm going to break out. I'm going to break out. He repeated the phrase like it was a spell, or a song he'd half remembered. Fast, rushed, desperate. We all turned slowly, the moment suddenly sharp around the edges. Well then, I said, clapping my hands once and standing. Seems our mysterious friend here has a plan. Care to let us in on the secret? The man didn't look up, just rocked slightly, hands clenched, whispering his mantra like it was the only thing holding a big other. I'm going to break out. Just then, a clink. Soft, deliberate. It came from above, through the narrow iron gates set high in the wall. The one that let in a sliver of light, not enough to warm the cell, just enough to remind you of what you were missing. Something dropped through. A small vial, glass and glinting, no larger than a thumb. It hit the ground near the muttering man and bounced once, twice, before spinning to a stop. We all stared at it. So did he. Then he lunged. No hesitation, no pause to wonder who sent it or what it might be. He was on it in a blink, scrambling like a rat towards the crumb, fingers clutching greedily around the glass. He uncorked it in a single, trembling motion and downed it with a desperate gulp. The silence after was heavier than before. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then he screamed. It wasn't a cry of fear or pain. It was something worse. A sound that clawed at the air like it didn't belong in this world. His body bent backwards, spine bowing as if pulled by invisible hands, fingers splayed, twitching, eyes wide and white, unseeing. His skin bulged, swelled, bones cracked like dry branches, muscles tore and reformed, stretching grotesquely beneath his flesh. He clutched at his stomach as it convulsed, veins surging like rivers beneath the skin, his whole frame twisting into something wrong. Thorak leapt to his feet, eyes wide. By the Stonefather, what in all hells is that? Kara backed away, her hand already glowing with the subtle shimmer of earthborn energy. Ryu stood, calm but taut, his eyes narrowing like a man watching a storm roll in. And me, I swallowed. Because I'd seen a lot in my time. Creatures from the edge of madness, things that lurked in corners of the world people like to pretend didn't exist. But this was something different. Looks like the plan was less sneak out, I muttered, backing towards the far wall, and more rip the bars off the wall and tear the guards in half. The man, what had once been a man, snarled, and then charged, but not at the cell door. The creature ran straight at Tara and struck her with such brute force that she flew across the cell and slammed into the far wall. The sound of impact was awful, like stone cracking under pressure. I stood frozen, useless. No family clan dagger at my side, no spellbook to channel even a single spark, just fear and blood in my ears. So, I did the only thing I could. I hurled myself at the monster. Whether it was courage or foolishness, I'll never know. I wrapped my arms around its thick neck and tried to drag it down. It barely noticed. With a twist of its torso, it flung me across the cell like a sack of barley. I hit one of the benches. It promptly shattered, leaving me sprawled in a pile of limbs and splintered wood. Before I could even groan, Thorak bellowed and charged. If I had been reckless, he was downright suicidal. But unlike me, Thorak knew how to grapple. His arms wrapped around the beast's midsection, thick and iron-hard, muscles honed by years of battle and alehouse brawls. With a roar of effort, he locked one of the creature's arms to its side and dug his boots into the stone floor. The beast bucked and snarled, but Thorak held firm, gritting his teeth. "You want to fight?" he growled. "Try picking on someone who hits back." And hit back he did. Thorak drove his forehead into the thing's ribs with a dull crack of bone meeting something far less yielding. He grunted and slammed his fist into its side over and over again, each blow like a blacksmith's hammer striking red-hot iron. The creature roared, struggling under his hold, but the stout dwarf clung tight, a living anchor. Beside him, Terra stirred. Dust fell from her shoulders as she rose slowly, her expression sharpened into a single point of focus. Her fingers, scraped and bloodied, pressed to the ground. And then the stone answered. It was subtle at first, a tremor, a shiver. Then the cell itself seemed to breathe. Cracks spidered across the floor beneath her hands, and stone peeled away from the wall in thin sheets, like bark coming loose from an ancient tree. The pieces hovered, quivering, then began to orbit her, drawn as if by unseen tethers. Bit by bit they slid into place around her body, shaping pauldrons over her shoulders, plating her arms, encasing her legs. Stone curled across her chest in layered folds, jagged but elegant, as if carved by some primal sculptor. When she finally stood, she was encased in armor that shimmered faintly with power. Not smooth or polished, but living, raw, earthborn. Her eyes, glowing faintly with that same power, narrowed at the monster. "I've had just about enough of this," she said, her voice quiet but firm, and the stones hummed in agreement. Terra didn't scream. She didn't speak. She felt, and the stone floor responded. First, dust spiraling up around her feet like startled birds. Her breath slowed, and the air changed. Thicker, heavier, with the smell of damp earth and old iron. Not the stink of the cell, no. This was older, deeper, like the air before a storm. Her fingers splayed against the ground, and her whole body followed. Back arching, knees braced, like a sapling straining against the wind. She drew the stone, not with a gesture, not with brute strength, but with something quieter, like coaxing, like asking. The wall behind her quivered. Then mortar cracked. Then, creak! Stone tore free, not shattered or broken, but called. 3 pieces, each the size of a clenched fist, slid out of the wall and hovered at her side, orbiting like the moons caught in a sudden, angry gravity. They spun slowly at first, then faster, driven by the rolling cadence of her breath. She raised the hand, and the first stone shot forward like a slung bolt. No warning, no arc, just raw, impossible speed. It struck the creature in the ribs. Thump, crack! It staggered, wheezing, clutching its side. Something snapped, bone or breath or both. The second followed before the first had even hit the ground. It didn't aim for the chest. It went lower, crueler. A knee. Thunk! The leg buckled like rotted timber, and the thing collapsed, a wet gasp tearing from its throat. The third stone she held, just for a moment. Her eyes flared, not glowing, not sparkling, but alive in a way no prisoner's eyes should be. She whispered something I couldn't hear. Perhaps a name, perhaps a prayer. Then she drove it forward. Not with rage, not even with vengeance. With certainty. The stone slammed into the thing's jaw and sent it sprawling. Limbs loose, jaw askew, blood misting in the air like fine rain. Then the silence came. Not still, but watchful. The way the world sometimes goes quiet after something sacred or something terrible. It didn't stay down. Of course it didn't. Some things bleed and break like men. Others endure. This thing was the latter. At first, it was just a twitch, barely more than a shrug of its shoulders, like a marionette snagged on an invisible string. Then its spine arched, grotesque and rigid, as sinew coiled around and rolled beneath pale, rotting flesh. A noise rose from its throat. Not a scream, not a snarl, but something caught between the two, like a rage trying to remember how to speak. Thoric held it. By all the gods, he held it. His arms were locked tight around the creature's torso, muscles bulging, knuckles white as he clung to it like a barnacle to the hull of a storm-tossed ship. I saw his fingers digging in, saw the beast's skin giving under them, too cold, too clammy, too wrong. Then it howled. I'll not forget that sound. There was too much of it, too many notes, too much hunger. It didn't echo so much as crawl across the stone like a spider with knives for legs. It thrashed, wild, mindless, fury given form. Elbows jabbed with the force of falling stones, knees kicked like battering rams. It slammed into the floor, into the walls, dragging Thoric with it like he weighed nothing at all. But he didn't let go. Gods, he didn't let go. And that only seemed to enrage it more. Kara had heard it, cracked something inside it, and now whatever had been keeping it tethered to flesh was starting to unravel. Not bone, not pride, something worse, older, hungrier. It flung its head like a maddened beast, jaws snapping, blood and spittle flying. It wasn't panicked, it wasn't scared. It was simply too furious to die. And then I saw it. The shift. The weight of it. Thoric's grip faltered for half a breath. Just a breath, and the creature surged. Not with skill, not with precision, just raw, relentless fury. The wind shifted. Not a breeze, but not a draft, but a change, as if the air itself remembered a promise. Ryu stood still, hands outstretched, fingers belayed like branches arching for spring. His eyes were half-lidded, not in calm, but in communion. Something in the stillness around him deepened, thickened. Then the wind came. It came sudden and fierce, rushing like it had been held back too long, a torrent, whirling around him in widening spirals, tugging at his robes, pulling at his hair, dust lifted from the stones like mist, dancing in eddies. Even the air smelled different. Ozone and riverbanks, distant rain. It didn't just move, it sang. It shrieked through the bars and moaned along the walls, a song of old things, of forgotten valleys and mountaintop silence. The wind knew him. In that moment, it loved him. He whispered a word, just one, too soft to catch, and the storm obeyed. It coiled tight around him, then snapped forward. A gale, shaped like a fist, struck the thrashing beast square in the chest. It reeled back with a grunt, air tore from its lungs, dust and loose stone clattering from the walls in the aftermath. The creature sagged against the floor, dazed, not down, not dead, but winded. Ryu didn't wait. He moved like water, fluid and fast, slipping past the thing before it could snarl. The wind followed him, gentle now, like a lover's breath. And there was Tara, one knee on the ground, hands splayed against the stone like she meant to hold up the world with it. Blood on her brow, dirt smudged across her cheek, her breath came ragged, and her eyes were half-clouded in pain. Ryu knelt beside her, his hands already moving, his voice already low and steady. The wind curled around them protectively, quiet as a prayer. I watched helpless, and I've never hated a word more. Helpless. It's a thing you never truly feel in the marrow until your hands are full of nothing and your head is full of too much. I had no blade to swing, no spell to shout. The magic in me curled in on itself, like a sleeping dog that wouldn't wake, no matter how loud the house burned. Tara crumpled one knee to the stone, and Ryu, bless him, was already at her side, the wind obeying him like an old friend who owed it a debt. I scrabbled towards the broken bench, its remnants scattered like old bones in the corner. My fingers closed around a jagged length of wood, useless, except to a man with nothing else. Desperation is a poor craftsman, but it can make a weapon when needed. The first chunk left my hand with more hope than aim. It clattered pitifully to the ground, not even bruising the beast's flailing limbs. The second, I threw harder, with a hiss through my teeth, pulling all the fury I had into motion. It whistled through the air and sailed clean past Ryu's head. He didn't flinch. Of course he didn't. He was too focused, too wrapped in whatever soft, sacred thing he was weaving with the wind and his words. But still, I winced. Sorry, I hissed through ragged breath. I grabbed another splintered shard, hoping that third time would pay for all, or at least cause less embarrassment. Thorak held on like a mountain might hold its ground in a storm, unyielding, rooted in the deep strength only the earth and stubborn dwarves possess. His arms, corded with tension, locked around the creature's midsection, muscles straining, teeth barred, and then he moved, not to restrain, but to punish. He drove a heavy fist into the beast's ribs with the force of a smith's hammer. 1, 2, 3 blows, each a thunderclap of knuckles against flesh. The sound was sickening, wet and deep, like fruit splitting under pressure. I could hear the dull crunch of bone, or maybe it was cartilage snapping where it shouldn't. The beast shrieked, not with fear, no, with fury, the kind of rage that blots out pain and blisters reason. It twisted, its long limbs lashing wildly, and with a final, savage jerk, broke free from Thorak's iron grip. The dwarf stumbled back a step, chest heaving, sweat carving muddy lines through the grime on his face. The creature turned, ragged, bloodied, and breathing hard. Deep cuts marred its hide, and one eye now squinted through a mask of blood. But its breath still came, hot and fast. Its limbs twitched with violence. It was beaten, yes, but far from broken. It let out a howl, not animal, not human, something in between. A wounded thing full of teeth and hate. Thorax back to the side, rolled his shoulders once, and stepped forward again. "Come on then, you great bastard," he growled. "I've still got 2 fists left and nothing better to do." The creature lunged before Thorak could finish his taunt, fangs barred, claws sweeping through the air with terrifying speed. One hook hand caught Thorak square in the chest, sending the dwarf crashing back to the stone wall with a grunt that sounded too close to pain. Another strike came, wild and brutal. Thorak raised his arm just in time, but the claws raked down it, carving red lines through flesh. He roared, not in agony, but in defiance, grabbing at the beast's wrist, trying to twist it, stop it, anything. But the creature had the upper hand now. It was a blur of fury and sinew, pressing in, forcing Thorak to his knees beneath the weight of its onslaught. Then, a sound, sharp and splitting, like a whip crack in a thunderstorm. And the rock came. Not tumbled or tossed, but hurled, with purpose, with fury, with precision born of pain and will. It struck the beast at the base of its skull with a sound that was both hollow and final. A deep, wet crunch that echoed through the holding cell. The creature staggered, its limbs twitched erratically, mouth gaping in a silent snarl. Then its knees buckled, and it crumpled to the ground in a heap, motionless. Behind it, Tara stood, barely on her feet, one arm outstretched, fingers trembling from the force of her will. Her breath came in short, ragged bursts. Blood trailed down her temple. Her lip was split, but her eyes were stone and fire. Thorak looked up at her from where he knelt, chest rising and falling like a forge bellows. He let out a low grunt, half chuckle, half groan. Remind me not to piss off the wee one. I was still holding what remained of the bench. 2 jagged splinters and a hope that it outlived its usefulness when the heavy iron doors slammed open with a sound that made my bones clench. Steel boots thundered down the halls. The guards poured in like water through a cracked dam. Weapons drawn, armor glinting dully in the flickering torchlight. For a heartbeat, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. The carnage spoke well enough for all of us. The creature lay in a crumpled mass, limbs twitching once, twice, then still. Tara swayed, bloodied and breathless, while Ryu crashed beside her, hands still glowing faintly with the soft sheen of healing. Thorak was wiping blood from his mouth, his beard matted with it, grinning like he just won a bar fight he didn't start, but very much enjoyed finishing. And me? I was still clutching wood and trying to look useful. One of the guards stepped forward, spear leveled. What in all the gods' rotten teeth happened here? I opened my mouth, closed it again. My tongue felt like a loaf of stale bread. Self-defense? I offered with a sheepish shrug and his splintered bench leg still in hand. The guard didn't look amused. Another moved to the beast's corpse. Prodding it with the butt of his halberd, he swore low and sharp. This thing shouldn't have been here, he muttered mostly to himself. I felt the cold trickle of something more dangerous than fear. The quiet, creeping knowledge that we'd stumbled into something larger than a simple cell block brawl. Something were wrong. The others felt it too. You could see it in the stiff way Ryu stood, in the way Thorak's smile faded as his fists uncurled. Even Tara, still catching her breath, narrowed her eyes like she already knew too much. I took a slow breath, trying to still the tremble in my limbs. The guards didn't care for explanations. Or if they did, they had no interest in hearing them from the likes of us. Orders were barked, curses louder still, shackles were slapped on wrists with practiced disdain. Ryu offered no resistance, nor did Thorak, though he winced as they fastened the manacles over his bruised skin. Tara growled, of course, but even she had the sense to not throw fists again. Not this time. As for me, I raised my splintered weapon in surrender, and they relieved me of it with more force than finesse. We were herded out like cattle, down stone quarters still echoing with the chaos we'd left behind, out through the heavy iron gates and into the pale blush of morning. The air smelled of ash and distant fires. But above us, blessedly, was sky. Honest sky. Painted in soft orange and streaked with rose. They promptly shoved us into a transport wagon with rusted bars and hay that smelled more of mildew than straw. We jostled in place, bruised and bloodied. No one spoke for a long while. Even Thorak was quiet. But as the first rays of sun spilled over the city walls, warm on my face and sharp in my eyes, I leaned back against the splintered wood and gave a crooked grin. Well, I muttered, at least I'm out of that damn cell and I can see the sun again. Small victories, eh?